Hello, students. In this brief PowerPoint, we're going to look at some of the topics of Chapter 7 of our text, which discusses grouping students in middle school. So to really understand well why middle schools are organized the way they are, we need to look at two things. Number one, how elementary and high schools are organized, and number two, how these organizational configurations respond to the developmental needs of students. So students in the elementary school, they can be thought of as being at an early and vulnerable stage of development as learners. They haven't established a record of success, yes, as students, and in many instances, they come from homes where there could be a lot of varieties of difficulty, and they need stability in their life. So the responsibility of the elementary school is to provide great amounts of supportive interpersonal support, usually in the form of an exclusive relationship with a warm and supportive teacher in a self-contained classroom. Even if students aren't coming from a variety of backgrounds, and they're not coming from backgrounds maybe where there's a lot of difficulty, they're still at a vulnerable point in their life, and they need that supportive interpersonal structure. That's why the self-contained classroom of the elementary school fits the developmental needs of young children best. Now, high school, it's grouped differently. At this point, your learners have matured as persons and they've established records of some academic success or at least stability. So they're generally grouped according to their interest in and their achievement of academic goals. The middle school, it's so much more difficult to just describe because the developmental variability among the students is so much more vast in such a short period of time. I mean, you have seen it. You've seen sixth graders that are almost 4 feet tall to those that are 6 feet tall, those that have already gone through puberty, those that have not. So there's a greater variety in terms of the way you organize and set up the school structure and the classes. And ultimately, it needs to respond to that unique student body's needs. And we're going to look at some of the different types and how they respond to different developmental needs on the next slide. We have two figures that help us to understand how and why middle schools are organized the way they are. The first one is figure 7.1, and that is actually available in your text on page 371. What this depicts is that the self-contained classroom contains students who are at the lower levels of development. They're young, vulnerable, they're a little more unstable, so they need more supportive interpersonal structure. They need to be surrounded by the same teacher and the same students in order to build community and to build security. And so the self-contained classroom is a great place for them. On the opposite end of this trajectory is departmentalization. Departmentalization occurs in high schools, and this is best suited for high school students because A, they are mature, they're much more stable, they have targeted interests, and their academic achievement often is in line with that. And it's based on teacher subject specialization. So you have your science department, your math department, your English department, and students change classes, and they are generally not with the same people at all throughout the course of the day based on their interests and needs. Your middle schools typically fall somewhere in the middle of that linear trajectory. And it can, though, go all the way back down to a self-contained classroom, and it can go up to higher levels of departmentalization depending on the nature and needs of your students. So if you look down at figure 7.2, this shows different styles of groupings that are more suitable depending on where your students fall on that linear trajectory above. So if you have students that are in the lower end, and this might be for a 5th through 8th school, not your typical like junior high, which would be 7th through 9th. So they're more vulnerable, they're a little less mature, there's greater variability there in their development. A modified core program might be the best style. Within a modified core program, the students are taught by the same homeroom teacher for all subjects. They only leave and depart and see the rest of the student body at lunch and when they are going home. So it's much like the elementary school, like the self-contained classroom. And there are certain middle schools that find that that structure works best for them. Now, most of the middle schools are going to fall within long-term teams and grade level teams. Within these, teachers teach on a certain grade level, but the students tend to see each other more, the same students more, because they are grouped um, according to each other's needs. When students start to see each other a little less, it's when they are in grade-wide teams. With grade-wide teams, most of the teachers will not share the same students. More often, teachers of the same subject at the same grade level will work together in what amounts to a small grade level department. So they might have some classes where they're with the same students, but then they branch out for certain contents, maybe math and science, where they're grouped on ability or interest or based on what the teacher's interests are. And so it's a bit of that departmentalization. Your full departmentalization sometimes in ninth grade in a seventh through ninth grade structure, maybe just the ninth graders are constantly switching from one department to another and just together with a core group of students for homeroom. But again, this is going to vary depending on the needs of your students and the particular grouping of the middle school. Is it a fifth grade structure? Is it a sixth through ninth? Is it a seventh through ninth? And even within that, it will depend on your student subculture. I'm not going to go too much into the different types. There's 7 different types there because the text is such a nice job laying it out, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what is to come and the different options that are available for middle school organization. What this chapter has done is it's made a case for more flexible, learner-oriented methods of school-wide grouping, really with the intent of balancing supportive interpersonal structure with the traditional teacher subject specialization that occurs in departmentalization. And the middle school concept, it's going to be something different for every school, and it has to take those factors into consideration. But it's generally not going to be at either extreme, but somewhere in the middle, or it might navigate closer to the left-hand side where the students need more supportive interpersonal structure with their teachers. So having these flexible approaches and making sure that they're tailored to the needs of the students, they have advantages. When you group students and you don't fully departmentalize and have them just always changing classes and being with a different group of students, but instead having at least periods where they're working with a team or they're working for a portion of the day with one teacher in a group, it has several different advantages. Continuous progress is one of them. See, when teachers are able to work in teams or they're able to work with just one group of students or be on an interdisciplinary planning team, they're more familiar with their colleagues and they can consult with them frequently about progress that students are making or problems of the past, present, or future. And records can be kept in a common planning area. So that's why having teams that work with smaller groups of students consistently helps to lend toward continuous progress. But having groups of students, if they work with a homeroom teacher for a certain portion of the day over so many subjects, and then perhaps they branch out later into some different content areas, it leads to a sense of community. They get to know one another. They get to know their teacher well, and this impacts discipline. Because they know one another very well, they're comfortable with one another, they understand the norms and the rules of the classroom better too. And so that impacts positively discipline. When you have one teacher responsible for a smaller group of students and not overseeing hundreds of them, it leads to enhanced diagnosis and prescription because they're able to hone in on the students' individualized needs. It leads to stronger individualized perception because that teacher is able to form a relationship with each student. And remember, middle school students still very much need that. Parental relationships are also enhanced because of the smaller quantity of students and parents to which each teacher is aligned. And it creates a sense of synergy within the classroom. That comes about too because of some of the unique programs that are offered within the middle school structure. Your advisor advisee programs and those interdisciplinary teams, they lead to increased and enhanced innovation because teachers bounce ideas off of each other. They enliven each other's creativity. And so that's why these flexible ideas of grouping are so important, and they need to respond to the needs of the students and the faculty in that school. But we've also seen teacher investment in students increase. And why wouldn't it? If you're with a smaller group that you can forge relationships with, build community, and better tailor instruction and activities to those students' needs, it naturally leads to greater investment in students on behalf of teachers. So, chapter 7 ends with a discussion of both inclusion and tracking. With respect to inclusion, there's a resounding yes. Inclusion needs to occur in the middle school classroom. How you do it and the mixture of the use of resource room and regular classroom, that's going to depend and change and vary based on the needs of your particular students. But the text gives some great advice for staff development and best practices for regular classroom teachers for best accommodating the needs of those with special needs or differentiated needs. Tracking. The text takes the place of no on ability grouping. And the rationale for that largely comes from the stigma and the lack of achievement that occurs for students who are placed in low track classes. So your low ability students end up with students of the same caliber of achievement. And as such, they have found through their studies that both the students and the teachers lower expectations. And for that reason, they do not support tracking and ability grouping. So they believe that you should have heterogeneous groups with mixed ability within the classroom. That way, surrounding those students that struggle more with higher achieving students can motivate them, could also lead to peer tutoring opportunities and a teach up atmosphere. There are varying opinions on this. This textbook isn't the be all end all and the only voice in this discussion, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what the authors of this text believe. So that wraps up chapter 7. I hope you enjoy your reading and that you learned something new.